are listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood, and I am joined today by Maggie Beyer. She is the Associate Director of Digital Media at Veritone One. Welcome to the program, Maggie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up at Veritone One?
Yeah, so I have been at Veritone One since March of 2020. My advertising career began in 2018, where I started at another agency, and I got really interested in the podcasts and the audio streaming space. I loved the idea of, blending data with storytelling to create impactful ads, and how podcasting is just so unique. And yeah, I've been here ever since and I absolutely love it.
That's awesome. So are you a podcast listener yourself? Were you like an enthusiast before you went to Veritone One?
A little bit, yeah. I love True Crime Junkie. That's a really favorite one of mine.
Yeah, that's awesome. So at True Native Media, we have the pleasure of working with Veritone One all the time. Absolutely a huge fan of the organization and the team that you have at the company. But tell us a little bit about Veritone One, some of the clients and that you have and the things that you do.
Yeah. So high level, Veritone One is the world's largest performance audio and creator-based company. So we are a tech-first company here at Veritone One, and everything that we do in our thinking is data first. So this can apply to our podcast tracking, how we measure success, how we create our ads too. And then some of the services that we offer include YouTube, radio, social influencer team, a podcast host team, and then there's the digital team, which is the team that I'm on. And through our digital team, we focus on driving customer acquisition and foster a more powerful online presence with a full funnel approach, with the goal being DR focused for most of our clients. So overall, we have a full service approach here at Veritone that is able to provide everything you need to launch and scale a successful campaign.
Awesome. And so what attracted you to the digital advertising side of things? Because, obviously you've just kind of listed through the fact that Veritone One is a performance-based company, but tell me a little bit about what about the digital side of things really is interesting to you.
Yeah, I love how we're able to, kind of going back to what my first answer to is just blending data with that storytelling, really being able to reach a wide variety of audiences within the digital space. More so specifically, what we focus on is music streaming. So through partners like Spotify and Pandora and a bunch of others. And then we also are able to target audiences within the podcast space. So we have coined that term at Veritone called targeted podcast, where we're able to dynamically insert ads into the podcast space and reach a wide variety of audiences that is able to help further scale that reach within the podcast ecosystem beyond just host-based buying. So I find that really exciting that there's just all these nitty-gritty tools to kind of further dive into your audience-based buying and everything in advertising.
Yeah, no, I love that you bring that up. I was actually just on a sales call with a company. They're an app-based company. They've never done any podcast advertising before. And at True Native, we primarily work with host-read ads. And we're working specifically with that host to create an endorsement style ad. And this ad buyer said that she really wanted to target 5 particular markets. And it can be a little bit tricky when you are trying to do that very detailed targeting and you've got a context like host-read endorsement ads, right? And, I think that for us and a lot of the shows that we work with, it's difficult to do that targeting on a one-to-one basis because a show could have a nice size audience, but when you start layering in these different targets, or really just the way I look at it is it's like, if you say, okay, first we want US only, that takes a percentage off. Then you say, we only want these 5 markets, and that takes a huge percentage off. And then you say, we only want to reach people between the ages of 25 and 45, then that takes people off, right? And the more you layer in, the smaller and smaller the audience gets. And if we're talking about just one particular podcast, it's really difficult to do that targeting because suddenly the audience of maybe 100,000 is dwindled down into like, oh, we can reach, maybe 5,000 people for you. And that's just not the scale that most advertisers need to really have success. And so what I hear you saying is that the digital side of things allows you to have both that scale as well as that targeting.
Yeah. And we're able to get very precise and nimble within our targeting. So you bringing up all those different layers that goes into a big media plan, we get very nimble. So we'll start it off by breaking it down by device. So desktop, iOS, Android. And then from there, we'll go, okay, let's do a male and female line, and then maybe throw in 2 other behavioral audiences that align with the clients. And from there, we can go out to the partners, have them confirm those audiences with us, and we tag each one individually, and each one gets their own spend bucket. There, we're able to optimize every week when results get pulled in. And we work on a 48-hour optimization clause with our partners. So with everything being pixel tracked and everything being broken down by those different segments, from behavioral to demo to geo to device, we can see each individual performance and then move money around based off what is performing best for our client. So that way we're ensuring we're still delivering the best return on their investment for their brand.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because I personally don't do a ton of that targeted ad buying. So I'm really fascinated by all of it. So when you talk about layering in all of these different elements and then tracking and then making changes within that 48-hour kind of window, so like walk us through exactly what that looks like. So is it that, oh, we were going to target, both iOS and Android, and it turns out that iOS is getting far more conversions than Android is, so we're going to get rid of Android? Like, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it depends. So some clients come in and they know exactly what targeting is really working very well for them. And so we'll go out to the partners, we will explore some of those audiences, and maybe we'll introduce a couple different audience segments. And we can start it off as a test and learn approach. So typically we like to give a campaign a few weeks just to kind of get off the ground and just see how performance is shaking out. If we are seeing it being drastically really bad, then we'll be quick to just turn it off, move that money into more of the top performing lines. And we really have no issue with scale there, because the ecosystem is just so massive in the streaming space and of course the targeted podcast space. So we're still able to really scale effectively there and still have way more audiences that we might not have even reached per device or per demo or behavioral that we're layering on a plan. But it's all within test and learning, seeing how the numbers are coming in, effectively moving. Maybe we reach out to the partner and say, make a little tweak here. Can you layer in another audience that's similar? Maybe this one just isn't as high performing. So we work very, very closely with our partners and very closely with the clients for everything that we do with them.
Excellent. So what I'm really curious about the creative side of things, because you have all of these different targeting capabilities. So you're obviously targeting a specific audience, but when you think about making modifications, is it like, where does creative come in the mix, and how much are you split testing maybe a specific offer or a call to action? Like what, because when I think about testing, to me, that creative piece is one of the most important. Obviously, targeting the right customer is the most important, but once you know, like, oh, well, these people are your buyers, how does creative, I guess, play in that mix?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another point where we really drill down to break everything as granular. So sometimes we'll do creative A/B testing. We could look to do a male versus female spot. We could look to have music versus no music. And then we can even tailor it to where, male and female, but maybe with one of our audience lines, maybe they're a plant lover. That's the company. Maybe they're all plant focused. Maybe they tailor the message just a tiny bit towards a plant enthusiast. Or if we're targeting true crime genre within the podcast ecosystem and we know the shows that are going to be hit with that audience, maybe we tailor a little bit to be more true crime focused. And we can tag each of those individually with their own individual spend by audience and by device, and then see that individual performance across the board. So yeah, that's kind of how we also take that approach too.
No, that's great. And I do feel like there is difference between audio streaming and music streaming. and like that podcast listener. So when you think of creative, are you doing two separate creatives for both of those?
It depends, but for the most part, the script is pretty much the same for that audience-based targeting, whether it's in the streaming space or the targeted podcast space. The end might be a little bit different in terms of the promo code, but that's just, more general for what appeals to the client on there and to track the results too. But it's pretty much all consistent.
But it's pretty much the same. That's interesting. And are you assisting the client at all with their creative, or do they typically bring it to you and say, hey, here's the creative, now you place it?
Yeah, that also varies too. So it just depends on the client's needs. So some of our clients like to have their internal resources record the spots for us, and then we'll send those off to the partners. Our partners typically record them for us as well. They're able to provide a VO list as well as different type of music variations, and we can tell them how we want the tone to sound, general age, if we want female or male, and kind of how we want it to be delivered overall. And then we'll bring that back to the client. Or Veritone, they're able to create spots as well. We have a whole creative team here too. So there's 3 different options our clients can take advantage of with us.
Nice. That's awesome. So I think that when we look at the podcast space, we do lean so heavily into that kind of host-read endorsement piece. And when we look at the dollars being spent, while kind of that programmatic piece is increasing over the years, it's still a smaller amount. Most advertisers do tend to gravitate toward those larger shows, right? We see that most of the spending right now happens in those top tier podcasts, but yet we know that by advertising in just those top tier podcasts, that you're missing a massive percentage of really that addressable audience. So with your approach, are you able to get into more of the long tail of podcast ad buying? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's definitely benefits to reaching beyond the top 500, and there is power in that long tail. So kind of what the power of that is, you're reaching that more engaged audience. You're having that precise targeting. Advertising on those smaller shows might be a bit more cost effective, and you're probably going to have a greater share of voice. I think it's easy to fall into buying those bigger shows because, yes, they do have a great return on your investment, but we don't want those smaller shows to get overlooked either. So we're able to work with our partners as well and kind of ask for a bit of a show list, and we can bucket those smaller shows based off the type of audience that we're looking to hit. And then we can pixel and track it that way as well. So that is a really great way to continue to expand your reach with all of your host buying or audience-based buying within the podcast space, really reaching into those smaller base shows. So that is something we're definitely able to do. And it's a really great way just to continue on testing and building your audience share as well.
Awesome. Well, and I think that, one of the aspects, I guess, that I always consider is that when you're advertising into those top tier podcasts, they have such massive audiences, which is really great. But I do think the engagement level just isn't the same. And part of what it is that I always like to consider is that some of those, it's not that the appeal of the big shows isn't great, right? Because there's an audience for a reason, and there's nothing wrong with partnering with these terrific shows. But when you get into the long tail of podcasts, you get some pretty obscure content, right? And I always feel like if somebody is listening to this show, they're very dedicated. And part of what we have to consider with podcast advertising is that listener is there for a reason. They're there because they like the content, and they're more likely, I think, to kind of listen to what the host has to say. I think they relate maybe more to the host than you might relate to, some, very big name person or some superstar. But I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? Do you feel like the engagement does tend to be a little stronger in the long tail?
I think so. I agree with everything you just said. And I think that because these listeners tend to have a stronger connection with that host, and if the host is aligning with a brand, those customers and those listeners, they trust that host. So when the host is advertising that brand to that audience, they're also more likely to gain long-term loyal customers because they're so engaged and because they value the host and what they have to say. And they're actively waiting for that show as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you've talked a little bit about pixel-based tracking. Can you tell us, especially as a performance-based agency, you really are seeing what's working and tracking results? What are the methods that you use?
Yeah, so we have a few different pixel partners that we work with. We have Claritas, we have Podscribe, we have Magellan. They kind of vary in benefits for each purpose that we use them for. We can also set up with unique vanity URLs, UTM parameters to add to those URLs, so the client can track source and medium and campaign in their analytics tool like Google Analytics, choosing an attribution model that fits your campaign goals to help better understand the customer journey. So those are kind of a few ways that we look to leverage for all of our base buying, but also really relying on that pixel too, to really help guide us in our optimizations for all of our buying.
So one of the things that I feel like I always hear about podcast advertising, and that I personally have found through, is that it does take time to see effectiveness. And the fact that you guys are looking at a 48-hour window, is there, and I mean, I don't even know, like, is there a lag in pixels for when you're receiving the information to when the conversions are actually taking place? And I think obviously with digital marketing in general, it is really important to have those short time frames. And with performance marketing in particular, you don't want someone who's going to run a campaign for, 3 months and then at the end be like, oh, well, I guess that didn't work. Like, let's shift gears. Let's do another 3 months and see if we can optimize. So, I guess walk us through, as you're looking through results and looking at the conversions, how quickly can you really tell if something is actually working?
Yeah, so once we launch, we get results pulled in every week. So we're able to kind of get a high level look of how everything is looking, being pulled into our dashboard. Typically, when it's a brand new campaign launch, we like to give it, at least a healthy budget for about a 6-week test just to start building that momentum. But in terms of, lag and look back windows, that also varies on clients' goals. Some we have 30-day look back, 7-day look back window. But it's also understanding that audio does work and it does help drive those results. And they do have that type of influence for customers to come to your website, and whether they're subscribing or purchasing, it all works together with all those platforms combined. But in terms of, our approach is you should keep audio always on. Turning it on and off can create a little bit of a disruption. You want to keep that message going within the ecosystem so you're not getting, overtaken by your competitors who are also starting to see that value within audio in the podcast space too.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really important point to make. One of the things that I find really fascinating about the podcast space that I think is amazing is how many newer brands tend to advertise in this space. And I always think that, awareness in general is so important. And if there is absolutely no brand awareness about a product, it's going to take some time to build that awareness before someone is going to make a purchasing decision. And I guess I'm curious, what do you feel like are kind of some of the strengths with audio in building that brand awareness for a brand that maybe is either really new or, they maybe just don't have a lot of brand recognition?
Yeah, I think it starts with knowing your audience and then also having a healthy budget to test. Our recent brands that we're testing right now and trying to get the word out, we started off with just very specific audiences that we know will work for them with a decent amount of budget per line to really help drive that awareness across the board. And then as well as working with our partners to control a bit more of that frequency. So if they're really trying to get their message out there, maybe having a slightly higher frequency on some of your audience lines, maybe around, I don't know, up to like 3 to 5, just to really remind people of the brand and whatnot. And then when you go into a phase 2 campaign, as you start to see those results come in, that's when it's kind of nice to scale back that frequency just a little bit more. So you're still resonating with that audience, as well as, expanding your reach to potential new customers as well. So it's kind of having a little bit of a strategic approach in terms of driving that awareness to eventually work all those customers all the way down the funnel.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. Love it. What do you feel like are some of the big challenges that advertisers face in the podcast space?
I think knowing that you can probably buy more beyond host-based buying too. So how we leverage with the host team, they come to us as well and we come to them, and we work very in tandem with one another. So knowing what's really working on the host side, we might find specific genres that are working, or specific partners or specific hosts. And then knowing like, okay, that's working. We're going to now expand that reach by placing ads dynamically and buying it in a targeted podcast audience-based buying from their learnings. So I think that was a big challenge for us when we acquired that type of buying about a couple of years ago, really trying to work with our partners and knowing, okay, we want to also target male and females, and we want to know what genres they're falling under, or we want to target plant lovers, which seems to be my audience of the day. Where are they indexing high by certain genre? Are we seeing they're more in true crime? Are they more in lifestyle? Are they more in news? And then from there, we can kind of tailor that and target those genres specifically, knowing, hey, plant company, you index really high in true crime, but we also discovered there's all these other audiences there that are converting very well. We should look to pull that audience out and test it further. So really just being nimble and quick and kind of exploring all different options, because there is a ton of ways you can buy within audience and podcast-based buying too.
Yeah, for sure. So do you guys typically start with the host-read endorsement campaigns and then see what is working in the different kind of genres and with messaging and things, and then move it into more of a digital programmatic approach? Or do you always, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the client too, but do you always start with both, you know, your digital and your host-read together?
It depends on the client, but we have found that it's a really great media model mix when we have host, streaming, and targeted podcast, all three running at the same time. So we have found that great success. Our analytics team had to do a big manual pull process for that, just to show how that all outlines and works together. But that is where we find the true success, where all three are running at the same time.
So obviously we know that audio is a really powerful medium, and it's going to deliver a lot of impact. But when you think about their overall advertising and marketing plan, they could be doing a lot of different types of advertising. You know, maybe they're doing social, maybe they're doing influencer marketing, maybe they're doing, you know, digital ad buying of some other form. So how are you considering all of their overall marketing and advertising plan in context with what you're doing with your audio planning? Are you guys looking at that?
Yeah, some clients kind of share that information with us as well to help us leverage those learnings. We'll use our own media mix model. Some of the other clients have their own media mix model. We might use a third-party vendor as well to kind of help track that too. But yeah, the main focus as well on our end has always been that audio-based buying too.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's really interesting how, you know, audio is obviously a really important piece, but there are so many other advertising outlets that people are using. And what I have heard that I think is really interesting is that when you add audio in, it can really help boost the performance of some of your other mediums. So I do think that looking at it as globally as possible is really important. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the ecosystem is massive. There's so much reach. There's so much scale. There's tons of potential. One of our clients is spending a crazy amount of money and they still haven't even reached the ceiling within streaming, and we're still able to maintain that frequency. So wow. The reach and potential is there. And yeah, audio is definitely one to not be overlooked because it's been proven, it's successful. It works very well for all of our clients. And yeah, I love working with it.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So essentially what you're saying is you have a client that's really has a very healthy budget and they're spending so much, but they're still like nowhere near tapping out. And because I feel like that's like, there's a saturation point, right, that you have to be really aware of. And I think that that can happen with host read ads too, you know, where it's like, we see maybe a show has the same advertiser for like 2 years. And then all of a sudden, maybe in year 3, we get a cancellation because advertisers like, this isn't working. And it's like, how is it not working? It worked for the last 2 years. But I do think that if the audience isn't growing on that particular podcast, you can reach a saturation point. But what you experience is that there isn't a saturation point essentially with when you're buying the way you guys are buying.
Yes, it's just understanding that the awareness is there, driving consumers down to convert. It's there. It's just how you tailor the message, how you deploy it, the audiences you layer on, the frequency controlling of it all. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of dynamics that go into it, but there's a way to fine tune and tweak it and make it work to really be a nice overall mix into your media goals.
Yeah, so cool. So do you feel like there's anything that is missing in the podcast space, especially from a technology perspective? I feel like there's just so many changes that are always happening in this space, but it still feels like, can be a little bit clunky. Like you mentioned, obviously your analytics team trying to bring everything together to like create a cohesive picture about what's happening. What do you feel like is missing, and how do you feel like we could improve this industry?
Yeah, I think this industry is ever growing, and I feel like once we fix something, there's something new that comes our way. What I feel like. But frequency is a really big one right now. That's something that we're working on trying to control more with our audio partners. So maybe, more refined frequency tools, maybe understanding how much the market share we are taking from our competitors. So that could be really interesting. In future, measurement tells us the market share we're taking from our competitors. So maybe a few months ago, our competitor had a certain amount of consumers. They were hit with our specific ads, and then a month later they came over to us. Mm-hmm. I feel like that can be done. It's just probably another very messy manual process that needs to be put together. But overall, better tracking, linking conversions with more clarity, and really honing in on frequency more, I think are some of the biggest ones.
Yeah, for sure. Frequency is a huge one for me, just because I feel like the tools really don't exist, especially within host reads, to do frequency capping in a really effective way. So yeah, it would be great to see some of those things come around. What are your predictions for the industry? Where do you feel like we'll be maybe in a year or two?
Gosh, so much. I feel like maybe within the amount of advertisers who are probably becoming more and more interested in podcasting, we are going to be moving more towards that dynamic insertion to accommodate with the large volume of advertisers coming into the space. There's deduplication efforts, utilizing more learnings from host buying and becoming more well-rounded as you're tapping into that audience-specific based buying. And then overall, I think having that more control over frequency. One of our Pixel partners is being able to help us with that, which is really great. And we're starting to kind of see more of that come in. So I'm pretty confident within, hopefully 6 months to the next year, we'll have more new problems that we'll be chatting about of how we can make things better. And this will be all fine-tuned and analyzed for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Maggie, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your insights and, just laying out your process so clearly. I think it's really helpful for advertisers that are thinking about entering the space. If somebody's listening and they're interested in working with Veritone One, where can they connect with you guys?
Yeah, they can go to veritoneone.com, and there should be a submit button towards the bottom. I would have to go back and check, but there's a way that you can go to veritoneone.com and submit and work with us. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. As we embark in more programmatic space, I know that there are lots of opportunities for targeting, and this episode certainly has laid out some of those options. If you haven't had a chance to check out my YouTube channel, please head on over to YouTube, where we are creating new content for you. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.